I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 122 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, April 18th, 2024, the committee is resuming its study of Competition Act and air travel in northern, rural, and remote communities. Avoiding audio feedback. Before we begin, I'd like to remind all members and all other meeting participants in the room of the following important preventative measures. To prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback incidents that can cause injuries, all in-person participants are reminded to keep their earpieces away from microphones at all time. As indicated in the communique from the Speaker to all members on Monday, April 29th, the following measures have been taken to help prevent audio feedback incidents. First, all earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces probability of audio feedback. The new earpieces are black in color, whereas the former earpieces were gray. Please only use the black approved earpiece. By default, all unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of the meeting. When you're not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for this purpose that you will find on the table as indicated. Please consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. The room layout has also been adjusted to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. Of course, these measures are in place so that we can conduct our business without interruption and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters. Thank you all for your cooperation. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses, colleagues appearing before us from 11 to noon. We have from the Department of Transport, Serge Bijamin, Assistant Deputy Minister Policy, welcome to you. Jennifer Little, Director General, Air Policy, welcome. Andy Cook, Associate Director General, Civil Aviation, and Vincent Millet, Director, National Air Services Policy, welcome to you all. Do we have opening remarks, Madam Clerk, from the... We do. So I will turn the floor over to you for your opening remarks. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to start, it's my birthday today, and I thought what better way to celebrate it than to come to TRAN. might be a first in history.
Mr. Chair, it's my birthday too.
Oh, happy birthday.
Hey, there's always common ground, right?
I know. We've lost control. Sets a record. We've lost control and we're only 2 minutes in.
Yeah, 2 minutes. I'll grab the sandwich on my way out too. Bonjour à tous. Je vous remercie, Monsieur.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for inviting me to speak today. It is my pleasure to join you and the honorable members of this committee. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today here in Ottawa is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. My name is Serge Bijamin. I'm Assistant Deputy Minister for Policy at Transport Canada. With me are Jennifer Little, the Director General of Air Policy, Vincent Millet, Director of National Air Services Policy, and
Directeur Général Associé.
Andy Cook is Associate Director General in Safety and Security at Transport Canada.
Regional connectivity in Canada's air sector and its impact on rural, remote, and northern community is a very complex issue with no easy solution. And we welcome the committee's initiative to undertake a study at this time. It is timely, it is needed, and will allow all of us to hear various views from different stakeholders as we continue to tackle this complex problem. As we all know, the Canadian sector, air sector, is an enabler of economic activity and is vital to connecting people, businesses, and communities across Canada, from coast to coast to coast. As we also know, Canada is a very unique country when it comes to air travel. At almost 10 million square kilometers, we're the second largest country in the world. Just by comparison, compared to the United States and Europe, our population density is quite low. We're just over 4 person per square kilometers. The EU is at 106 person per square kilometers, and the US is at 34 person per square kilometer. In addition, the vast distances between smaller and remote communities in Canada can hamper regional connectivity, as air carriers cannot always make these routes profitable. This is in contrast to communities in the US and the EU, where many people live near a major population center, distances between major cities are closer and demand is higher. Le Nord canadien offre encore plus de défis pour le transport aérien.
Canada's north offers even more challenges for air travel and connectivity. Less than 1% of Canada's population lives above the 60th parallel, but this territory comprises 40% of Canada's landmass. In most cases, there is not enough demand for travel to allow carriers to fill the number of seats needed to remain economically viable. This issue is of particular concern in communities which rely predominantly on air transportation. As well, the pandemic eroded regional air services as communities saw reductions in the level of air service.
As a result of these challenges, the government stepped in during the pandemic to help address regional connectivity. This included more than $140 million for the Remote Air Services Program, more than $120 million for the Regional Air Transportation Initiative, and the government also put in place terms and conditions for the Canadian North merger with First Air to ensure that both airlines could survive and continue to serve northern communities. Quite simply, these efforts kept the industry afloat and attempted to maintain connectivity. Further, the government continues to make investment in northern aviation through the Airport Capital Assistance Program, otherwise known as ACAP, and the National Trade Corridor Funds, NTCF. To date, the government has invested over $1 billion towards over 1,000 projects at 201 regional airports and additional projects at Northern Airport. While we're seeing more air connectivity than during the pandemic, important challenges remain. They just do. For instance, while Canada's top 4 airports and many of our mid-sized airports have recovered to near pre-pandemic levels, many smaller communities have not seen a rebound of demand. A lot of these communities are still at 30-50% of pre-pandemic level. And this is due to a number of factors, including a shortage of pilots, aircraft mechanics, and other skilled labor. To sum it up, connectivity, like competition, are complex issues that are challenging and require more efforts from government to industry and everyone in between as we continue to move the needle in the right direction. As the sector continues to evolve and emerge from one of its most consequential periods, continuing to explore various measures to increase connectivity is key. En conclusion, l'étude du comité arrive à
In
un moment.
conclusion, this committee's study comes at an opportune time as Canada's air industry continues to recover, adjust, and evolve. Mr. Chair, that concludes my opening remarks, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
To your joy, I have once again in my possession the yellow card and the red card. To ensure equity, I will be raising the yellow card when you have 15 seconds left. The red card means that your time is up. I ask that all of you do your best to try and look at me as much as possible while you're asking questions or or responding to the questions. It is now a pleasure for me to turn the floor over to Mr. Davidson. Mr. Davidson, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes for your question, sir.
Well, good morning. Good morning, and thanks for Transport Canada officials appearing here on the study of regional airports as well. And we know that there's significant issues that have led to small and regional airports like Buttonville to close. But instead of getting new airports built to fill that void, we are seeing very concerning negligence on the part of Transport Canada and the Minister of Transport. The proponents of the Baldwin East Aerodrome have received approval from Transport Canada to dump thousands of tons of fill on protected wetlands under the guise of constructing an aerodrome, even though they have been charged with provincial offenses relating to the dumping of contaminated fill. These proponents are currently subject to hearings under the Ontario Environmental Protection Act. In the recent quote from the proceedings, the MO of William Goldlist appears to be accept contaminated soil where suggesting that the waste will be disposed in an approved landfill, then misrepresenting the waste as clean fill and depositing it on properties not approved to receive waste. William Goldlist frequently changes the name and or locations of his companies, and most recently appears to be using numbered companies as a front. While enforcement action is taken against his company, Wilford Goldlist is uncooperative and prefers to fight the enforcement actions rather than addressing the matter. End quote. One of these companies is supposedly building an airdrome in Georgina. And I represent the great riding, the Supasala Bowl of Canada, York Simcoe, where they clearly plan to dump fill and leave the land to ruin once they've made their money off tipping fees. Transport Canada is well aware of this. The Minister of Transport is well aware of it. And may I say, this is the second Minister of Transport that I've dealt with on this issue, and has been informed numerous occasions, has been informed by the government of Ontario, the municipalities, FCM, the Chippewas of Georgina Island, about their limitations of enforcing their laws and bylaws with regard to federally, and I'll say that again, to federally regulated aerodromes. So my question today to transport officials is, why has this project not been stopped, since it is clearly not in the public interest in my community?
And thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. My group and the policy group, we're not familiar with that project, but what I could commit to doing is going back within the department, getting more information on the project and what Transport Canada has been doing with respect to the project, and submitting a written answer to the committee here, if that's okay.
And I thank you for that. I want the committee to understand this, and I think other members of Parliament here, we're sent here to fight for our residences. And right now, this is the government, the Minister of Transport, doing business badly for Canadians. This has been an ongoing issue over 3 years. I have numerous articles here. In Durham, the Green Bank Airport, that lawsuit exceeded, and the cleanup exceeded $105 million for the Green Bank Airport. This is an issue that has went on in Tottenham, in Burlington, and there's serious environmental concerns that Transport Canada is ignoring, flat out ignoring. Now, I understand. You know, the frustrating part for me is we've asked for the minister to appear, Mr. Chair, at this committee. And Mr. Chair, can I clarify that there's been no answer from the minister?
We clarified at the previous meeting, I believe, that we have not received a response back with regards to his availability and confirmation of his attendance.
So you are the Transport Canada officials that I can communicate directly with. And again, how concerning it is for me that we can't have the minister before committee to answer for this. So do you understand my frustration as an MP not being able to get answers and a decision made?
Yeah, and we commit to bringing this back to the department and to briefing our minister as well.
Because I just want everyone here, Mr. Chair, to understand that this is a regional airport study. And, you know, I'm here today. I was hoping that Transport Canada officials could answer, have some sort of guidance for my residents on this issue. Because, again, you know, it was written after what happened in Green Bank. And the minister has used his power 3 times in the past to not allow construction of an airport, given that is not in the public interest. And, okay, Mr. Chair, I see that I am out of time. I will pick this up on the next round.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davidson. Next, we have Mr. Fillmore. Mr. Fillmore, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our officials from Transport Canada. Thank you for your service to Canadians and the industries that support them. I represent a harbor city, Halifax, where the National Trade Corridor Fund has been deployed to great effect, and I thank you for your involvement, if there is any, on that. But I want to turn the lens to the airline industry, and particularly connecting to northern and remote communities, and how the National Trade Corridor Fund has been applied there. I wonder if you could just talk about which projects are underway, if there are future projects coming up through the NTCF.
Certainly, and I'll pass it on to my colleague Vincent Millet.
Sure, I don't have the full list with me, and that's something we can commit to provide. I can give a few examples of projects that were funded through the NTCF that were helpful to the connectivity in the north, including the building of a warehouse facility in Iqaluit, also including the building of a warehouse facility in Ottawa to facilitate the shipment of goods in the north, and also the refurbishment of several runways in the north.
Okay. I'll just give a pause to make sure no one else wanted to add anything. Otherwise, I'll carry on.
I could add a few more details, if that's okay. In addition to what Vincent has said, so some specific numbers, not specific projects. So under the NTCF for airports, around $400 million has been set aside. And also under the NTCF, 96 projects also have been set aside for the North, valued at $166 million.
Okay, thank you. And if you're able to provide the committee with a fuller list that your colleague referred to, that would be, I think, helpful data for the analysts. Turning away from NTCF, what other strategies are being considered by Transport Canada to improve the affordability and connectivity for residents of the North?
Yeah, so we are looking at a wide range of measures, and I think this committee is definitely key to looking at everything that could be around the table. We're studying the U.S. model and also seeing what are some of the measures the U.S. has put in place that might be successful, might apply to Canada or not. We're looking at the same thing in the EU. We're also looking at Australia. So we're really looking at taking a global approach on what are some of the measures, initiative from around the world that could help Canada achieve better connectivity. So we're definitely looking at that. And we're also quite interested in the Quebec program and what they've been running and what they've been doing in Quebec when it comes to connectivity. So all cards on the table. Like I said, it's a complex issue. But we're exploring every avenue and figuring out what works, if it would work in Canada, affordability, cost benefit. So all cards on the table, and we're really looking at this seriously and leaving no stones unturned.
Well, thank you. I applaud you looking elsewhere for solutions, and if the wheel is already invented, that's great. But turning back to Canada and our own experience and what we may have learned here, for example, by the recent shutting down of Lynx Air, that clearly exposed the financial vulnerabilities of the smaller northern and remote carriers. What lessons have we learned, would you say, from the Lynx Air case that we could change, do differently moving forward to better support the smaller carriers?
Yeah, and thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. So a couple of things. So one, it was unfortunate that Lynx went out of business. Back in 2018, we did change the rules around foreign ownership. It went from 25% to 49%, with the caveat that no single entity could control more than 25% of a share. And when we did that, we did see new entrants, the Lynx and others. And we believe that the pandemic had a major impact on Lynx's ability to survive. They launched, the pandemic started, as with all other airlines, and even more so than those already established for a new entrant. I think it proved quite a lot to take on in that period, and when the recovery was started, they were in a position where they had to make a business decision to stay or to fold, and I guess they made the decision to fold. A couple of key takeaways from us and from our perspective, what we're hearing, definitely on the foreign ownership side, we've made changes in 2008. We're continuing to look and see, but as a footnote, just a note, in the U.S., that the foreign ownership is at 25%. In Japan is at 33%. And in Europe, it's at 49% as well. So foreign ownership changes may not be the solution. So we're really looking at different ways and different things of what else we could do to make sure that we provide the environment for these ultra low-cost carriers to survive.
Okay, thank you. I have a feeling I'm out of time there.
You are indeed, Mr. Fillmore. Well done.
Okay, thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelou-Duval. À vous la parole. 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, over to you for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to our witnesses for joining us today. I would like to begin with Mr. Benjamin, and happy birthday. You indicated in your opening remarks that for your regional air transport was a complex issue that did not necessarily have an easy solution. I'd like to hear you speak to that. We have welcomed many witnesses in this committee on this study. We also had many witnesses speaking to the previous study and the links between those two studies. What seems to be a subject of consensus for all witnesses, there are many differences, but this is a major point for all, is that the cost of operating air service in the regions is extremely high, and that is also a hindrance to the profitability of these airlines. Because what we have heard is that the more fees are added and the higher the costs become, the more difficult it becomes to render an operation profitable. And almost all of the witnesses indicated that regional air transport is not a simple service where one can say, well, it'll simply work autonomously with the user-payer system and the issues will be settled. Do you have that same view of the issue? We understand that regional transport and northern air transport face unique challenges. It isn't the same thing as traveling from Toronto to Montreal. It is not at all the same issue. We absolutely understand this. We have programs in place that are beginning to address these issues. A remote air, that is RASP, or Remote Access Services Program, is a program where
we provide funding for the airplane strips to allow planes to land. Ça permet à plusieurs communautés d'avoir des
and this allows a number of communities to be able to have planes available. What we're also doing here is that we are attempting to ensure that we strike a balance between passenger safety, as you've mentioned, DPR, and to avoid any undue burden put on the carriers when it comes to DRPR, that is rebooking compensation. There are various categories when it comes to small carriers. So we're trying to differentiate between the large carriers from small carriers. We also have specific programs for the north. Well, there may be existing programs, but they don't seem to have yielded many results. They weren't always successful. Again, the situation remains critical in the north, so I imagine that more could be done. Well, my question for you would also be this, and this was underscored by a colleague previously, was the absence of the minister today, that you're here in his place. Mr. Rodriguez was not able to be present in person here. Did he explain to you why he was not interested in coming to the committee? I believe that the schedules of the minister is extremely tight right now. If he could, he would have been here. and he's extremely busy at this time. If he could be here, he would be, but he was unable to attend. And since we're speaking about the Quebec lieutenant, there was a work group that was put in place by Quebec to invite the federal government to participate. However, I don't see any federal participation to that table. Do you know why the minister's cabinet has decided not to take part in Quebec's initiative? Yes, what I can say to that is that we have two working groups. One is the Council of Ministers. This is the ministers of transport of all the provinces and territories, and they discuss all of the issues that you have raised, because this affects Quebec extensively, and Quebec provides solutions, and it also shares those solutions with other provinces. So we have a program involving other players, and Quebec is there with the Council of Ministers. We also have the deputy ministers, and that is a meeting that often takes place. And the regional connectivity issues are discussed, and they also speak about the recovery of the air sector. These were fully discussed during these meetings. But all of the members around the table, whether they're from Quebec, they represent the municipalities of Quebec, for example, they're representatives from the Quebec Airport. These are all individuals that are able to dialogue with the federal government. And if the federal government were at the table, it would be easier to identify the limitations and issues facing both parties. It isn't because the federal government is around the table that it necessarily has to commit, at least that's how I see it, to doing exactly what some of the representatives around the table are indicating, but at the very least, a dialogue would take place. And now we have the sense that Quebec is working on its side, and the federal government is more or less interested in what is taking place there. It's more or less present there. But it does not seem to be evidence that the federal government is attuned to issues in Quebec. I think that we're favorable towards issues in Quebec. In addition to having this forum, we also have other meetings with Quebec. We have regarding air issues, and not only does this involve the province of Quebec, but we also involve other players from the air sector. The minister is in constant touch with Air Transat, with Air Canada, the airport of Montreal, as well as the Quebec airport. Across the board, they're present. Thank you very much, Mr. Barcelo Duval.
Floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome back to committee, Mr. Benjamin. Happy birthday. Welcome to your colleagues as well. This issue of regional connectivity and affordability is one that really affects folks in the region I represent, as you well know. And I was curious, in your opening remarks, you talked a little bit about the trend since the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic was very challenging. But the longer term trend when it comes to connectivity in Canada, does Transport Canada have a line of sight on what the longer term trend has been, particularly since deregulation in the 1980s? Have rural communities in Canada received greater service from the air sector since deregulation?
And thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. So we could definitely come back to you with a paper that provides specific on what you've asked, which would be from the 80s to this point now. So definitely we could do that. On connectivity, more recently, for the pandemic and post-pandemic, what I could tell you is we are tracking it. And one way we're tracking it is we're looking at the number of flights from and to communities, the number of available seats to those communities, the number of new destinations from those communities. So we're tracking all of those very closely and reminding our air sector and air carriers that maintaining a reasonable amount of connectivity is key, especially in Canada.
So, yeah, my understanding is that since the pandemic, the recovery has been proceeding, rather slowly. Some communities are doing better in the recovery than others. But I'm interested in whether Transport Canada even has a sense, looking at the past 10 years, are communities, are we seeing better connectivity in Canada? Or is the reason that you're working so hard on this because actually the trend is going in the opposite direction? Certainly anecdotally in the communities I represent, there are a lot of examples where communities are seeing less service than they did 10 years ago. So in the community that I live in, 10 years ago, there were 2 airlines with 2 scheduled flights per day each to Vancouver. Now there's 1 airline, and for parts of the year, there's only 1 scheduled flight per day to Vancouver. So there's been a significant reduction in service. Other communities have seen the same thing. I'm just wondering, overall, is the trend going in the wrong direction? Is that why Transport Canada is seized with this?
So we are seized with it, and I think what you've just said.
It's more the previous question, Mr. Bijman. Which direction is the trend going?
Yeah, and what I was going to say is we're seized with it, and the way you've described it basically is exactly what we're seeing. It's not a uniform connectivity happening. There's certain places that are experiencing more connectivity, other places that are experiencing less connectivity. And it just hasn't been a balanced approach. So we would be happy to look at very specific communities and answering that question, but it hasn't been a one-size-fit-all. There has been some communities that have and are being more connected, and there has been other communities that frankly have lost connection.
And is it a similar mixed story when it comes to affordability? Because of course that's the other aspect of this challenge. It's not just connectivity, it's can people afford the flights that are being offered?
Yeah, and that's another good question as well. And I think the question you're asking here, if I could understand, is whether the plane tickets have been going up or down the last 10 years. And we're happy to provide that specific as well too. Don't have the number here with me, but happy to provide you with that specific.
Mr. Chair, if we could just note that information I think would be super valuable for this study, and if Mr. Bijman would be willing to provide it, that would be great. Yeah, certainly the observation is that in communities where a monopoly exists, the airlines seem to be able to charge whatever they figure the maximum people will be willing to pay is. And so we see the cost of flights in small airplanes, short distances, is exorbitant in many cases. So I'm curious, in Transport Canada's view, what is the main approach by which we can achieve affordability for air travelers in rural communities? But like there are different options, different tools, different approaches. I think after deregulation, the promise was that increased competition was going to deliver this panacea of affordable airfare. It hasn't really done that in very many places in rural Canada. What are the other options?
And I think through this committee and the witnesses you've heard, and we've read the witnesses, we've read some of the proposals, including interlining and different and various other potential solutions. And our commitment, like I said, is we're here to understand more, learn more, which will then allow us and help us to do our policy work to come up with some recommendation. Totally agree. The connectivity in Canada and affordability is an issue that needs to be tackled. And it's not an easy one. It's a complex solution, but we're committed to looking at it, and we have been looking at it, and we'll continue to do so.
And what's the timeline for that work? You indicated that you're listening to the committee, and then you're going to be making recommendations, assumedly to the Minister of Transport. When can Canadians expect some sort of regulatory or policy change that will drive affordability and connectivity?
Yeah, I don't have a timeline per se at the moment, but I could commit that we're hard at work, and our hope is to get this work done as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Backrack. Next, we have Mr. Davidson. Mr. Davidson, the floor is yours once again. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to pick up where I left off, it's nice to see that you're listening and there's going to be action taken. And we're talking about economic viability in rural Canada. What was shocking to me about wanting to construct an aerodrome in Canada, Transport Canada does not look at any economic viability or a business case for an aerodrome. That was outright shocking to me. And, 2 other things that should be concerning for the members of this committee. Transport Canada, think about this in the age that we're in now, approved an aerodrome site for 2 runways that do not point in the direction of the prevailing wind, and they're to be constructed at 991 meters. That's 3,250 feet. Why would that be concerning to Transport Canada? Well, because anything over 1,000 meters requires a federal economic assessment. Both these runways were approved at 991 meters. So, you know, my spidey senses go off right away to say, why would that be? The other thing, I think the committee or our officials here would understand, if you were building a new airport, it would surely, if Transport Canada looked at economic viability, you would want a runway at 5,000 feet. Would you not agree, Mr. Chair? Or sorry, committee members?
It depends on a number of factors.
Well, I think the factor, if I may say, I think if I built a new runway, I would want an ILS. And 5,000 feet is the minimum for an ILS. The proponent said they were going to use a Buttonville NDB. And if it's my understanding, if the committee can answer that, the federal government is actually decommissioning NDBs. Is that not correct?
I'll turn it to my colleague, Andy.
I can speak to that. Just first of all, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. There is a trend across Canada to decommission NDBs, non-directional beacons, as a ground service or ground navigational aids. And what we're being used in replacement or as an alternate is, to a large extent, global navigation systems, space-based systems, which are much more accurate. Non-directional beacons imply all kinds of errors. If you know, my experience with them as a pilot is, you know, if you dip the wings of your airplane, it changes the angle that you're pointing towards the non-directional beacon.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Cook. I just have limited time. So I think the reasonable person would want to ask the questions. If you were building a runway under 5,000 feet at 3,200 feet, 100 feet short of triggering an environmental assessment, not looking at having an ILS put in place, you know, looking at using an NDB when they're being decommissioned, that would be, and the runway is not pointed in the prevailing wind direction. I think you being a pilot, that'd be a head scratcher for you. Would that be a reasonable assessment?
Well, thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Chair. I would say that on a very short runway like that, an ILS, is an instrument landing system, is an instrument approach that is used by aircraft, typically not general aviation aircraft to the same extent, which would be landing on those very short runways. So there may not be a business case for it. I don't have specifics on that aerodrome in question, but I'm sure that if we could get the specifics of that particular aerodrome, we could get back to the committee in a timely fashion with the response.
No, I appreciate that. I'm just saying, if I was building a new airport, those are the things, if I would transport, be looking at, not to utilize a back course localizer or an NDB. I would be looking to build an airport to make an economic case for it, and Transport Canada does not look at any of those things, which was shocking to me. This committee's heard about issues in the Arctic related to planes not being able to land on gravel runways in the far north. And talking about economic viability, Canada's sovereignty, this is obviously a concern for consumer air travel, as well as planes with those capabilities as they're phased out. My question would be, what about the Royal Canadian Air Force? How can we ensure that our Arctic security and sovereignty is ensured when our planes can no longer land in the north? And just I guess to you, Mr. Cook, you know that the Boeing 737-200 is the only aircraft that you can have a gravel kit for. They're going to be phased out. This committee heard testimony here about gravel runways in the north. That's now become very concerning for food costs. And you know, the government of Canada has just purchased F-35s that cannot operate on gravel runways at all. So I'm out of time, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to give you 15 seconds to pose the question. I think it's a good one.
So where are we at with the Arctic and aluminum runways? If you could maybe let us know.
Thanks for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair. We are working actively with the alternate services group. I believe you had a representative from them speak to you very recently, who is a proponent of aluminum runways. There are various types of alternate surfaces. Transport Canada approved the use of thin bituminous surfaces, which is largely a Saskatchewan issue, as an alternate hard runway surface. So we're working with industry. We understand the importance and the need for aircraft to land in the north. And I'm pleased to say, as an RCF veteran, I've landed on gravel runways this many, many times in a C-130 Hercules, and the C-17 Globemaster, the very large transport aircraft, is approved for that as well. So, or at least it was while I served. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cook, and thank you, Mr. Davidson. Next, we have Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do want to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Davidson as well for asking those questions. This is the whole purpose of this study, is to look at how we can be more productive with respect to the testimony that we're receiving from the witnesses. We're fortunate today to have witnesses that have flown before, but as well from Transport Canada that have been on this for quite some time. And with that, when the report is actually generated from the testimony that's received by the analysts, I'm sure that the minister is going to come back with his department, his team, and with a lot of recommendations how we move forward. Specific to Mr. Davidson's comments, and I understand some of the situations he's finding himself in his writing, especially as it relates to remediation, and with that, looking at the possibility of doing site-specific risk assessments, to then work with the province as well with respect to assessments, and find out what those ppm levels are, those parts per million levels are, and different options as it relates to remediation, and also working with other partners such as the communities to in fact achieve the same. Getting a bit more granular to the assessments with the aerodrome, my first question is to Mr. Benjamin with respect to, would the committee be expecting in the response to the minister further information as it relates to the aerodrome?
Definitely. So the question's been posed, and we will look at it and try to find as much information as possible. So I'm not personally aware of it, but I will commit to finding out within the department who is and providing the information that we find.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Cook, with respect to the gravel runways, are we to expect some information relative to that? And I'll take it a step further, information that would then address Mr. Davidson's concerns?
Yes, thanks for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair, we're working actively with the industry and stakeholder group that is proposing the use of alternate runway surfaces. We understand very much the need for aircraft to service the north, and very much aware of the issue that Mr. Davidson raised with respect to the Boeing 737-200. There is an issue that both requires certification of the runway surface type and also certification of the aircraft itself to land on those runway surfaces. That requires involvement from the original equipment manufacturers and occasionally can necessitate additions to the aircraft manuals that permit the flight. So far, OEMs have not indicated a willingness to look at that side of the issue in great detail, but we are working with them actively, and it is a very important issue that needs to be addressed in order to continue to permit the safe operation of air assets in the north.
And I guess I'll preface my next question by stating that, and I apologize for being repetitive, but this is in fact why we're here. You know, putting the politics aside and partisanship aside, we're here to get the job done. And regardless of where or what side of the table those concerns come from, the expectation is the testimony that's received by the analysts comes back with a report, and with that moves on to your team, and then the minister responds with the recommendations from what we then hear from testimony from the witnesses. So again, the reason why we appreciate so much your being here directly, so that way you can hear firsthand some of those concerns and some of those issues. I guess my last question, and I'd like to give you some time on answering this question, is with respect to what I brought up at the last meeting, trying to leverage, I guess, a whole government and all-in approach to transportation in the north. So yes, we're talking about air, but there's also the possibility of multimodal and intermodal services for the movement of people and goods. And of course, I say leverage because it's the same cost, the same method of transportation that might be accrued over time based on what's available in those individual jurisdictions. So again, can we expect when we get the recommendations back from you based on what you hear from us, that it's not just going to be about air, but the possibility of leveraging those capital and operational expenditures to include an all-in approach to moving people and goods, so that therefore, as Mr. Davidson mentioned earlier, we'll also see some of the efficiencies based on the transport of, yes, people, but also goods such as food into the north.
Definitely. And I think it's Thanks for the question, Mr. Chair, and I definitely agree. I think the solution will require everything you've just mentioned. It will require efforts and partnership with a range of parties across the ecosystem. The federal government will need to play a part, provincial and territorial government as well, potentially some municipalities, potentially some airlines, potentially some airports. So it's a lot of levers in different places. And a study like this helps bring everything under one roof. And definitely looking forward to the recommendation of the committee and what Transport Canada's response will be.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. Merci, Mr. Benjamin. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou-Duval. À vous la
Mr.
parole.
Barcelou-Duval, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So another thing that I wanted to talk to you about is this. During a testimony from Quebec municipalities, they talked about an airport infrastructure improvement fund, and that fund seemed insufficient. Amounts hadn't been indexed for 20 years or so, and then year after year, it's the same amounts that are coming back. And it, allows airports to renovate it allows one airport to be renovated per year because there's about $40 million. So is that something that you're aware the insufficiency of that fund? Is that something you're aware of? There's not just one airport in the country. I don't know how many there are. Maybe you could tell us, but I'm sure that there are more than one. Yes, there are more. There are many. And I'm going to start answering your question, and then my team will find the exact number of airports. So there are a lot of airports in Canada. So you're definitely right. The RASP program, and ACAP as well, the Airport Capital Assistance Program, we would like to have more funding so that we could do more projects. And it's something that we'll continue pursuing to see if there are possibilities so that we can increase the funding. But for the time being, we have what we have. And with what we have, we try to do what is possible. We try to fund the largest number of projects possible. I mean, it's always better to have more, and without a doubt. But for now, I think with what we have, we continue to make progress. So there are 300 airports in Canada. Great. Well, another thing that I wanted to bring up with you, and I know my time is limited, they're the Union of Municipalities in Quebec, and I know there are other people who came or who support this policy. These people would have liked to see a review of the existing regulatory framework so that local initiatives, so for example, municipalities that use RFPs, like what we see with buses, they'd like to see more flexibility for regions that want to take over this file, and so that they can say, this is what we need and this is what we want to do for regional air transportation. So is the department aware of this willingness? And is there an openness to review the regulatory framework in the future? Well, personally, I'm not aware of that. Are you here, Vincent? Yes, there are initiatives in some of the regions. So like the Atlantic provinces, for example, there is currently a group looking at solutions to solve their connectivity problems. So they've had studies done by various consultants. And they've issued an RFP to attract airlines to their region. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Mr. Bachrach, floor is yours. 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Benjamin, we've had some statements made by airlines about air passenger protection regulations. And so I'll ask some questions on that front. My questions are more about how the regulations treat passengers who make complaints. And as you know, this is a longstanding concern of ours. Recently, we've heard stories from passengers who are no longer being told by the CTA where they stand in the queue. At one point, when you made a complaint, the CTA would tell you that you are complaint number 20,337, 60,592, whatever your spot was in the queue, and that's no longer happening. Are you aware of this?
I am not aware of it, and this is under the purview of the Canada Transportation Agency. So they're responsible for receiving the complaint, but also managing, adjudicating those complaints. So I feel the question would be better answered by my colleagues at the Canadian Transportation Agency.
Yeah, I guess this is the difficulty, but the CTA is also has a connection to Transport Canada, and we've certainly asked Transport Canada other questions about air passenger protection regulations. The minister is also ultimately responsible for these regulations because he wrote them. He wrote them with the help of your department, and the regulations are not serving passengers. So I just talked to a fellow the other evening. He made a complaint, went through the lengthy complaint process, came out the other end. The CTA actually awarded compensation in his favor. Air Canada had until April to pay the compensation. They still haven't paid. That was as of this week. What is the government doing to ensure that the airlines actually pay the compensation that they're ordered to?
Yeah, and in full transparency, it's the complaint process is a challenge, and there's a lot of challenge around the complaint process. I believe my colleagues at the Canadian Transportation Agency have been working around the clock to try to make improvement. More improvement is needed. But definitely, I would to not step in their zone and their turf and what they do and how they operate. I would really prefer the question gets answered by the committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So let me ask, because you indicated, pilot shortage, mechanic shortage, a number of shortages which are problematic, particularly in northern and remote circumstances. During the pandemic and following the pandemic, there was an incredible backlog in terms of getting medicals for pilots. In fact, we've heard about pilot schools that had to close down. I certainly had a number of constituents call my office where we were trying to get that. So has that been remedied? And if so, what lessons have been learned from that I mean, it's unacceptable delay. It's an unforced error. How do we fix this?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair, this is a great opportunity to set the record straight. There isn't actually a backlog of files for medicals. What there is there is a queue of complex medical cases. So right now, the regulations require that medically fit pilots have their medical applications processed within 40 business days. That happens in almost every single case. I think it's important to underscore that 75% of pilots that are going to Canadian aviation medical examiners or doctors to have their medicals reviewed, those are processed on the spot in the doctor's office. Those ab initio applications for new pilots have to come through our headquarters, and all pilot applications who are fit are processed, within the 40 business day standard.
Is that 40 business days? Has that been the case? Like, is that just recently, or has that been the case? Because I reject your analysis. That's certainly not what I've heard.
Thank you. It is not a recent trend. What you referred to as a backlog, there is a queue of approximately 5,000 to 6,000 files that are awaiting processing, but those files are driven by the complexity of the medical cases.
Would you not suggest that 5,000 to 6,000 is a large number? It's almost as bad as APPR.
It is a large number. It is a large number, but it's important to put that number in context. Those cases are complex medical cases that would otherwise not meet the medical standards So these are pilots that could otherwise be considered unfit, but for which the minister is trying to exercise discretion to get those pilots flying. But often that requires medical diagnostic tests where there's intersections with provincial health cues and so on and so forth, intersections with specialists who have to assess it. So that complex case queue is a number of cases where the minister is trying to exercise discretion to get those pilots flying, but it takes time.
Thank you. So what is Transport Canada doing in terms of the high cost of flight training for aspiring pilots? I mean, I've certainly talked to some that are in flight school in my constituency, and I know others have too, and there's a burden. So are there any initiatives underway to help alleviate that? Because that's an impediment to the pilot shortage.
Thanks for the question. I can take that one as well. Through you, Mr. Chair, we are working extensively in civil aviation. Although our mandate is mostly with aviation safety, we're working with stakeholders to try to come up with solutions that can be mutually beneficial. You're right, it is a very high cost to obtain an airline transport pilot license in Canada. It takes many years because there's a sequence of licenses that have to be gone through first and the experience that needs to be gotten. I can say that there are some airlines, I don't want to name any specific operators, but there are some airlines in Canada that are working on what is called a cadet program to partner with training institutions in provinces, and that offers a lot of promise. It is a challenge, and we are very willing to work with stakeholders and partners to try to address the issue.
And if I could add a little bit to what Andy just said. So according to our current research, the demand for pilot in Canada is around 2,500 each year. And we're potentially looking at a shortfall of close to 10,000 pilots by the end of this decade. And the studies and the cost of the study has been mentioned as a roadblock, and we totally understand that. And we have begun work with partners at other departments, ESDC, for instance, IRCC, as well as provinces and territories who do receive federal funding for training. So we're looking at different ways and trying to work with provinces to have some of these pilot training be eligible for their provincially run.
Let me cut you off so I can get one more question in.
For their provincially run pilot training.
So slow progress. Flight duty regulations are an impediment to operating in the north and remote. That adds some challenges. Is Transport Canada doing anything to address those?
Thanks for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair. We are looking at the flight duty regulations, but it is important to underscore that the flight duty regulations that were promulgated, announced in 2018 and implemented in 2020 and 22 are designed to make pilots less fatigued in flight. And fatigue is an impairment. I've flown on long missions myself. Anything that reduces the amount of time a pilot can spend in the cockpit makes a pilot safer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muse, and thank you, Mr. Cook. And next and finally for our first round, we have Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, before I pose questions to our panelists today, I would like to move a motion that I put on notice on June 6th. I'll read it into the record. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study examining the value of regional economic development agencies in Canada and their impact to the quality of life in Canadian cities and communities. That the committee invite witnesses with specific knowledge of the work of regional development agencies, that the committee allocate a minimum of 7 meetings to this study, and that the committee report its findings to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response. Mr. Chair, if I could speak to that motion. First off, I just want to say that the importance of the Atlantic Canada Opportunity Agency in Atlantic Canada is immense. And I was astonished to learn that John Williamson, a Conservative colleague, said, and I quote, no Atlantic MP is prepared to make the tough but necessary case that regional development agencies hurt the development of local economies in the long run. And not only did Mr. Williams write this, but Conservatives last December repeatedly attempted to cut RDA funding, to reduce funding of almost every RDA program to $25,000. And Mr. Chair, that to me is astonishing and appalling when I think about the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency that was established back in 1987, and the amount of work it's done in the Atlantic provinces. I could speak to this for hours. I certainly can speak to about Newfoundland and Labrador and what it's meant. When this agency was introduced, it was done because it was a very difficult and sluggish economy in Atlantic Canada. Things were really tough. And this organization has achieved immense benefit, brought immense benefit to Atlantic Canada. And the other RDAs that have been structured since are really modeled after what the Atlantic Canada Opportunity Agency has done and achieved. When I think about economic value and the important part that it brings to the life of small businesses and communities in rural Atlantic Canada, I talk about the Burin Peninsula, for example, and the amount of work and the dollars that have gone in there to establish Gregg Sea Farms as a major employer and contributor to the economy. I could talk about the Bonavista Vista Peninsula and the work it's done for providing support to establish a UNESCO geopark, that is designation that is supporting 25 communities and driving tourism in a very positive direction. I could talk about the money and the funding and support that's provided to municipalities in Newfoundland and Labrador, many of them very small, and who depend heavily on ACOA, as we commonly references to that organization, and the kind of work that it supports for small towns in rural Newfoundland and Labrador and rural Atlantic Canada. We could talk about the provincial organizations like the Newfoundland and Labrador Snowmobile Federation, who is a major winter tourism driver. Talk about Hospitality Newfoundland and Labrador, a major tourism organization. And we can also talk about the impact it's had, positive impact it's had for the fishing industry and other industries in terms of export trade and the kind of things that's happening. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I wanted to introduce this motion and suggest that we do a very comprehensive study to point out the value of this organization, Atlantic Canada, and the other RDAs across the country. It's not just about ACOA, it's about the 7 regional development agencies across the country, although albeit some of them are practically new, like the one in BC, for example, or some of the ones in Western Canada. But nevertheless, the study would be an opportunity to inform and remind Conservatives of the work done by these RDAs, which I credit with changing the economy in Atlantic Canada since 1987. So, Mr. Chair, I leave it there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. So who I have on the list right now, I have Dr. Lewis, I have Mr. Badaway, I have Mr. Muse, and I see your hand up, Mr. Strahl. Is that to speak, sir? Perfect. Okay. So we'll turn the floor over to Dr. Lewis.
Yes, thank you through you, Chair. I'm concerned about the relevance of this particular study to this committee. And Mr. Rogers he spoke about the connections between fishing and export and trade and issues that really could be better studied within another committee. I'm also concerned about the need for particularities in the motion about what the nature and the scope of the motion is. The term value is so vaguely described that I don't see the connection to this committee per se, and also given the vast regional differences that different regions have. Like when you look at the regional development agencies, you have the Atlantic Canada Opportunity Agency, you have the Canada's Economic Development for Quebec Agency, you have the Canada Northern Economic Development Agency, you have the Federal Economic Development Agency for Southern Ontario, then you have the Federal Economic Development Agency for Northern Ontario, you have the Prairies Economic Development Canada, and then you have the Pacific Economic Development Canada. I've listed 7 agencies. The motion is calling for a minimum of 7 meetings. And to understand the comprehensive nature of these different regional development agencies, much of which are dealing with issues that are not even related to this committee itself, I would submit that this motion is improperly brought before the wrong committee, and that the depths that would be required in order to explore the vague definition of value across these various agencies would probably take up our entire year of study within this committee. So those are my submissions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. Before we continue, do I have agreement from committee members to thank the witnesses for their time today and ask that they be excused? Seeing no objection, thank you so much, witnesses. You may leave the room now at your pleasure. Next on the list, we have Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess a very polite reminder to members of the committee that this committee isn't just transport, it's transport, infrastructure, and communities. And I actually find it refreshing that we're going to be looking at embarking on a study other than transport and other than infrastructure and concentrating on communities. With that said, I do recognize that the Conservative Party of Canada does have an appetite to eliminate RDAs, and with that, eliminate the investments that are made in communities with respect to their corporate strategies. And of course, as a partner in areas such as tourism, economy, social, environment, the RDAs have made very specific investments throughout the years. I just made an investment in my riding for 2 wineries and for the city of Port Colborne that are very well received, and of course leverage a lot of the investments that communities are making. And without that opportunity to leverage, they just simply wouldn't be able to do that. So with that, we've become a very needed partner by the municipalities and the communities and different organizations that are part of those communities to really get those works underway, as well as looking at, again, the strategies that they have in place to accomplish that. You know, when I look at the different funds that are available, not just from the RDAs, but what this does as well, Mr. Rogers' motion, is also looks at a whole of government approach, because it's not just about getting dollars to these projects from a regional development agency through FedDev, but also through other avenues such as the NTCF fund, such as you know, many funds from many different departments at the federal level. The Canada Community Building Fund as another one that also offsets what would otherwise be placed on a property tax bill or a water bill. So not only are we getting projects off the ground through the RDAs, but we're also eliminating the need to go to property taxpayers and water bill, wastewater ratepayers to get those projects off the ground through the partnerships, once again, with the federal government. So again, I do want to remind members that, you know, this motion is very critical and attaches itself to a third component of this committee's responsibility, and that is the communities on top of infrastructure and transportation. I guess another point I want to make, and I guess it's relevant to the study that we're actually speaking about today, is, and a lot of the questions that were asked on the how to the what with respect to rural airports. Mr. Davison brought up some thoughts about remediation on properties, and of course other costs that would be attached to the study that we're discussing today. A lot of that funding can come from that whole of government approach, whether it be through an RDA or whether it be FedDev or other departments. And with that, it gives that opportunity once again to get those projects out of off the ground. The last thing I'll say, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to RDAs and when it comes to the investments that they make and how it lends itself to our other two areas of this committee, which is transportation and infrastructure, is that when we look at projects, they need capacity. It's no different than identifying an official plan in a community and a secondary plan that would attach itself to give that official plan the capacity it needs, whether it be water, wastewater, roads, sidewalks, gutters, parks, and the list goes on, any growth-related cost. This study will attach itself to that as well. It'll attach itself to that capacity needed for those projects, some of which may in fact be transportation-related, like the study we're talking about right now. Some of that might be infrastructure-related. When it comes to a road or water or a sewer or a park, or even other somewhat abstract costs when it comes to policing and community services and public health, and the list goes on, which, by the way, and I'll repeat myself, would otherwise be picked up by a property taxpayer or a water, wastewater ratepayer through the water bills. So I think this study is very relevant to the community. By looking at many of the issues and projects and so on and so forth that we've been discussing for the past 9 years, and attaching to it now the community aspect of it, giving full respect to community strategic plans, and being a partner in helping fund through the RDAs those strategic plans. And then therefore taking the emphasis off of the property taxpayer and the water wastewater ratepayer through their water bills, and getting the projects done, getting the job done. How many municipalities, Mr. Chairman, do you talk to that are under an infrastructure deficit right now, not only trying to maintain and manage the assets that they've had and have, but also trying to move forward an agenda that progresses the community well into the future, leverages existing and new economic development, as well as creates a better lifestyle for its residents. That is this community's mandate. Transport, infrastructure, and communities. And I congratulate the member for bringing this motion up. I congratulate you, Mr. Rogers, because not often does this committee actually delve into the community's aspect of our responsibility, our mandate, while at the same time attaching itself to the capacity needed with respect to transportation and infrastructure that add to some of those strategies that you're talking about through the RDAs. And lastly, I'll say this, is that it's about leveraging. It's about leveraging the dollars that transportation, the Minister of Transportation, the Minister of Infrastructure would otherwise be asked to provide, and leveraging that with the RDAs. Excuse me, Mr. Muse, I heard that, and that was not called for. That was not called for. It's not bullshit. This is what we're dealing with in this committee. So choose your words wisely, please. I congratulate Mr. Rogers, because this is about leveraging too. It's not asking one minister, it's not asking two ministers, but it's asking 3 or 4 ministers to delve into their pockets to provide funding for a myriad of different projects. That's leveraging, that's partnership, that's being responsible, fiscally responsible, and it's also being a partner with the municipalities to help satisfy the corporate strategies that they're putting forward on behalf of their residents. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Badaway. Next, we have Mr. Muse, followed by Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Mr. Muse.
Sure. So I mean, I can speak only from the perspective of Southern Ontario and the Federal Development Agency of Southern Ontario. I don't know what, I won't pretend to speak for COA or other regional development organizations across the country. But I do know that during the Harper government, there were many good investments by FedDev throughout Southern Ontario, many in my constituency that I can recall, including Clean Water Tech, amongst other things. But if we look recently, I'm recalling about a month ago the news release from FedDev Ontario for the investment of $1.7 million in a pasta maker in Vaughan to create 10 jobs. So that's $170,000 per job. I would submit that those are not the jobs of the future. That's, and I'm not sure how this alleviates the property taxpayers of Vaughan. So I'll just leave that there. Look, at these development agencies are all fall under industry. So this is obviously an appropriate study for the industry committee. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Muse. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelou-Duval. Et vous la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Tout en reconnaissant que...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, I see that my colleagues are very passionate about this debate. I would also like to say on behalf of this committee that we have a witness here today that has traveled 7 hours to be here with us. He has travel, a hotel, and we have another guest waiting as well. And I think regional transportation is an important subject. So I wonder if the committee would agree to temporarily suspend the debate on Mr. Rogers' debate or motion so that we can listen to the other guests and we can always come back to this debate at the end of the committee meeting. I think that would be good so that our witnesses haven't traveled for nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Do I have consent to adjourn debate on the motion put forward by Mr. Rogers so we can continue with the witness testimony today? Oh, I have Mr. Straw, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Backrack. I've got a list, so it's really just to respond to the fact that we do have two witnesses here. Is it the will of the committee to continue with this discussion or to adjourn and perhaps discuss this at a later date? Yes.
I think did Mr. Barcelou-Duval move a motion to adjourn the debate? If so, we just go to a vote.
Est-ce que vous avez mis de l'avant une motion?
Did you propose a motion? No, but I can. In my opinion, there are two possibilities. So either we suspend and here are two witnesses, and then at the end of the committee, we can take a few minutes to talk about it, or we could adjourn, but I'm ready to do whatever the committee wants. So yes, I'm going to propose that we adjourn this debate, and then maybe we can see if we can just suspend it.
We'll go to a vote.
Mr. Radaway? Mr. Fillmore?
Yes. Yes.
Ms. Koutrakis?
Yes.
Monsieur Iacono? Monsieur Iacono? Vous pouvez voter à main levée sinon.
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Straw?
Yes.
Mr. Muse?
Yes.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Davidson?
Yes.
Monsieur Barcelou-Duval?
Oui.
Mr. Backrack?
Yes.
11 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. So we'll continue with the line of questioning, but we will do so after we take a 2-minute break. We need to suspend in order to give the audiovisual team a chance to set up properly. So the meeting is suspended. call this meeting back to order. Colleagues, for the second half of today's meeting, we have appearing before us from the Canadian Airports Council, Monette Pasher, President by video conference. Welcome to you. Welcome back. Always good to have you here. And from ProPair Inc., Justin Lemieux, Vice-Président. Bienvenue à vous. We'll begin with our opening remarks, and for that, I'll turn the floor over to you, Ms. Pasher. You have 5 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for the invitation to appear today and to discuss the current study. Air travel in northern, rural, and remote communities is a topic of great importance for the leaders of Canada's airports and the communities that we serve. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining today from Toronto Pearson on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation people, and I pay respect to elders past and present. My name is Monette Pasher. I'm the president of Canada's Airport Council. For those of you that may not know, our organization was formed in '92 as the devolution of airports from the federal government to local control was beginning. So the CAC serves as an industry conduit for airports across the country to collaborate on best practices and work together on a wide range of significant files, including innovation, passenger facilitation, sustainability, supply chains, and regulations to capitalize on the growth of air travel in our country. CAC, we represent more than 100 airports, including all of the National Airport System airports, all that serve passenger traffic in every province and territory. Canada is a vast and diverse nation, blessed with breathtaking landscapes and rich cultural heritage spanning from coast to coast to coast. Yet nestled within this expansive terrain are communities that often find themselves geographically isolated, lacking the essential infrastructure necessary for sustainable development. It is in these communities that the role of aviation is paramount. Regardless of where Canadians live, there is an essential need for affordable and reliable air service. For Canadians in rural and remote communities, air service is not a luxury, but rather it's an essential part of their everyday lives. Take Canadians who live in Nunavut, where there are more than 25 communities that are fly in and fly out. They're only accessible by air. They depend on aviation for medical service, for fresh food on their shelves, and for other critical supplies. However, the reality remains that many of our rural and remote communities continue to face barriers to air travel, ranging from limited flight options to prohibitive costs. As stewards of the aviation industry, it is incumbent upon us to address these challenges head-on and work collaboratively together with government, stakeholders, and local communities to enhance air travel. Investing in airport infrastructure, supporting regional carriers for essential service, and implementing targeted incentives are just a few examples of the measures that can be taken to foster competition and expand air travel opportunities in underserved areas. When it comes to all airports in the territories, they rely on funding from the Airport Capital Assistance Program that we call ACAP, and also rely on the territorial government funding. The ACAP fund was created in 1995, and it's only funded at $38 million annually. So that's $38 million to support nearly 200 airports, small airports across the country. So to put that into context, the cost to pave just one runway is approximately $10 million at a small airport. So there's extensive need across the country, especially in the north and rural and remote areas, for safety-related infrastructure. We have been calling for this fund to be increased to $95 million annually to support the actual level of need across the country, and we were pleased to see it be at that level throughout the pandemic. Aviation in Canada is a network, and optimizing air travel includes removing barriers. One barrier I see is the need to protect our airspace from development. Another is that airports should not be a profit center for government. This was a policy decision made when the airports were divested back in the early 90s, but it continues today. Are other modes of travel a direct profit center for government? Rail, ferries, roads? For most Canadians, air is how they choose to travel, more than 150 million trips annually. But for some in remote communities, it is the only mode of travel. So when it comes to public policy, air travel should be viewed through a lens of the essential role it plays in our economy. To put this in context with just one example, there are 9,000 people from the Yukon who travel to Vancouver each year for medical appointments, and the Yukon's total population is less than 50,000 people. So CAC is ready to work with the members of this committee to strengthen the journey for all passengers, including a commitment to northern and remote communities. Let us recognize the transformative power of aviation in bridging distances, connecting people, and fostering prosperity. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pasher. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Lemieux. Monsieur Lemieux, la parole est à vous.
We now have Mr. Lemieux, and you have 5 minutes. Go ahead. Hello, everyone. Distinguished member of the committee. As a Vice President of Business Development and Operation for Proper Inc. and EDGAR co-chartering platform, I am honored to have the opportunity to testify before you at this meeting. Thank you very much. Founded in 1954, Proper has the distinction of being the oldest company of its kind, enjoying for several generations a predominant position in the specialized air charter and aeromedical transport industry in Quebec. Headquartered in Rouyn-Noranda, Abitibi-Témiscamingue, we operate 12 turboprop aircraft, including 4 ambulance aircraft, to serve the communities of northern Quebec 24/7. The success of our organization relies on dedicated professionals with superior expertise and a culture that fosters the development of regional aviation. Despite this, Proper, like the rest of the airline industry, faces many challenges and obstacles, notably the growing shortage of qualified professional pilots, unstable weather conditions on gravel runways with limited facilities and equipment, and that's just to name a few. Is it normal to head to a northern community to save a life and not know if the runway is adequately cleared, not know the weather conditions, and not have access to de-icing equipment? These challenges need to be addressed in a context of 24-hour operation, given their impact on crew stress levels and consequently on the level of risk to transport safety. I would have liked the first witnesses today see my speech. To minimize operation risk and improve essential services of Canada remote communities, we need a commitment from government institutions to invest in improved airport equipment, air navigation system, and meteorological services. I can't help but allude to the latest Canadian aviation regulation on flight crew hours of work. These regulations are designed to minimize risk, but they also considerably reduce cockpit experience. Indeed, the manpower issue is cause for concern and is hampering the growth of organizations like ours, which wish to train more pilots and increase service to regional and rural airlines. These regulations were imposed by Transport Canada without consulting us or taking into account the operational realities of regional carriers. What's more, these regulations have forced us to increase our workforce by 35% just to maintain our operations. It is difficult for us, and for many other airlines, to understand Transport Canada's reasoning in this matter. While the above points raise major issues for our industry, I am confident that they are being carefully considered and that we are all committed to improve accessibility, strengthening air service, and encouraging economic development in northern communities. For your information, starting a new air link between a major center and a rural community with an 18-seat aircraft on a 5-day-a-week schedule flying 3 hours a day represent a financial risk of several $1 million. A risk we'd be willing to take in conjunction with our federal and provincial government if a subsidy program were put in place to offset the losses associated with launching a new route that would enable us to offer attractive fares to travelers. While the creation of new commercial air routes in remote areas is favorable to the economic development of these regions, there are other solutions for improving air service without even having to hire more pilots or buying more aircraft. It's in this solution-oriented spirit and with the aim of improving accessibility to the region that my partner, Etienne Lambert, and I came up with the innovative idea of creating a co-lighting platform that we've named EDGAR. Our mission is to make air charter accessible to more travelers safely and reliably, and to offer more options to travelers, especially in Canada's northern, rural, and remote communities. To comply with current regulations, seats available for co-chartering on our platform are offered only to companies and their employees. This way of operating respects charterers, carriers, and co-charterers while retaining the advantage of charter flights. Many large corporations, private and public, need and use charter flight to move their employees. These flights are generally between major cities and remote locations in Canada. While it would be ideal for flight capacity to be 100% utilized, it is virtually impossible for this company to have a perfect ratio between the number of employees to travel, aircraft capacity, and flight frequency, meaning that seats remain vacant and unused. As mentioned above, the current model is not available to all travelers, but only to companies and their employees. Nevertheless, it would be possible, in collaboration with government bodies, to relax certain air passenger protection regulation and make these seats accessible to all travelers without restriction. So the main reason is to have the main reason for chartering an aircraft is to have total control over the aircraft schedule and itineraries. It is therefore unrealistic to imagine a company and its carrier sharing vacant seats with the public if they run the risk of having to compensate passengers should they exercise their right to change their flight's itinerary to suit their own needs. Only by optimizing charter flights would the major companies and their partner carrier be able to improve accessibility to Canada's northern, rural, and remote communities. Let me add that in this eventuality, seat pricing would be done in collaboration with the commercial airlines to ensure that there is no unfair competition established and that the operational realities of each are respected. I'm going to finish in a few seconds. In conclusion, my colleague and I believe that everyone should be free to contract on whatever terms and conditions they see fit, especially if this promotes the accessibility and democratization of regional flight. In this sense, we are convinced that this bill will make a big difference. In my behalf, Proper Edgar and Edgar, I would like to thank you for allowing me to share with you some of our realities and our vision. I want you to know that we are firmly committed to regulation and the collaboration of the various players. Thank you very much, Mr. Lemieux.
Colleagues, 5 minutes each with Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the... I don't know why that was necessary. There we are. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for their patience and their presentation. I would like to ask Ms. Pasher, you obviously were following our previous study on generally in competition as a result of Lynx leaving, going bankrupt essentially, filing for creditor protection, and we talked about a number of airlines that have suffered a similar fate. We had the major airlines and some of the smaller airlines as well come before the committee, and all of them referenced airport fees as a key inhibitor to being able to offer lower fares and therefore increase competition. We've heard from all of them as well, or lots of stakeholders, that perhaps the solution is that the federal government stopped collecting the $400 million in airport rents and simply either, stop collecting it and putting it in general revenue, I should say, and reinvesting that, or not collect it altogether and let airports spend that money in another way. I guess my question is, if the federal government was to reduce or return, eliminate, reduce, or return those airport rents that are currently charged, would there be any noticeable impact to passengers in terms of lower fares, or would the airports simply keep that revenue, keep their airport improvement fees where they are, keep the amount they charge to airlines to fly out of those airports the same? I guess what would be the benefit to consumers or passengers if the government was to reduce or eliminate those airport rents?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Yeah, I mean, of course, if we're going to be reducing cost in the aviation ecosystem in Canada, passengers would see lower costs. As you know, this is a system that's based on a user pay model. When airports were divested from the federal government to our non-share business corporations, they essentially reinvest all profits made back into the infrastructure. And we're unique in that way in Canada. And I think that that has proven to be a good model when we look at the time span. But we certainly just faced the pandemic, and it was a challenging period. I mean, other than healthcare, this is probably the industry that has been most challenged, and it went on for so long. And I think we're all still recovering financially from those impacts. Carriers are. It was certainly a challenging time for links, which we saw, but challenging for all carriers and challenging for airports. So I think now we're on the other side of that, which is the good news, and we need to be looking to the future and talking about how we're going to grow our industry, and it is a growth industry, so which is good news. But I think when we look at that in terms of airport rent, the $400 million that is paid to the government annually, for land lease, I think that would be better used, reinvested in essential airport infrastructure across this country, as there is great need for infrastructure improvements.
Well, thank you for that. And Mr. Chair, as this might be our last public meeting in this session, I would like to use my remaining minute to just get on the record my motion that I had submitted to the committee on June 11th. I'll just read it into the record. It says, given the amount of unfinished work at this committee, the committee instructs the chair to schedule 5 meetings between July 8th and September 13th to address outstanding business and pressing matters facing Canadians, such as meetings agreed to by this committee to investigate appointments at the Canada Infrastructure Bank and the minister's appearance to testify on the budget and other ongoing work by the committee. That's the motion, Mr. Chair. I would defer to my colleagues. I know that they do want to ask some questions. I did want to read that into the public record, and hope that we can address that next week when we meet again. But I didn't want that to happen behind closed doors, so I wanted to get that out in the public. I don't know what the procedure is here for you, Mr. Chair, but I'm anxious to allow my other colleagues to have their rounds of questioning, but did want to get that on the record.
Mr. Schwal, could you kindly clarify whether you just wanted to read your motion into the record or whether you are formally moving the motion? It will determine what the next steps are, sir.
Right. Well, I guess let's leave it at reading it into the record, and so the public can acknowledge that I intend to try to get a vote on that next week.
Thank you for clarifying, Mr. Strahl. That concludes your time. I will now move to Mr. Badaway. Nope, Ms. Koutrakis. Ms. Koutrakis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us here today. And thank you, Ms. Pasher. Nice to see you again before this committee again. I'll address my questions to you, Ms. Pasher. Can you please explain to this committee the role that your organization plays when it comes to airlines providing rural and remote connectivity?
So, I mean, it's obviously the role of carriers to service our country, but our airports represent communities. And what we do to support air service development is work with carriers, provide incentives, certainly to try to attract more air service to communities. We work with provincial governments. Many of our airports are municipal airports. They're working with municipal airports. We're working with the federal government. So part of our role as airports across this country is to represent our communities and to advocate and push and develop the air service that's required, working with all partners. So something we're very passionate about, and certainly the pandemic, post-pandemic recovery, there's been a challenge in regional and rural connectivity. So while as a system, we're back to that about 100% this year in terms of passenger traffic. There's been a lot of shifts. We're seeing larger aircraft, less frequency, and our regional airports are suffering. Our smaller airports, some of them are at 70%, some 50, some 30. So we've seen some dramatic market shifts where there's airports that used to have over 10 flights a day in frequency and they're down to 2 or 3. This impacts communities, and it's certainly a concern in rural and remote areas, as well as the cost of flying. So that's something that we hear, being community entities. We're very close to our communities, and we hear about this often, and we're working with premiers, and we're working closely with all areas of government to try to develop that air service that Canadians require.
So do I understand correctly when you say that your organization does take part in advocating to extend routes or add routes when they are cut?
The airports do, yeah. So our airports certainly play that role in advocating for their communities, and I'm here representing, our airports as the advocacy voice for all of our airports across the country.
And are you aware whether the airports are consulted when routes are being added or cut?
Yeah, so our airports work quite closely with carriers, and of course, when a route is being cut, they are spoken to, and I think, those are commercial decisions that carriers need to make. They're, operating a business, but yes, they do consult with their partners and certainly advise them of the decision that's been made.
So earlier, when we had the Transport Canada officials testifying in the first hour, Mr. Benjamin, I believe, was the one that said that they are looking to various jurisdictions around the world to see, what they are doing in their jurisdiction to combat competition and connectivity in rural and northern, areas. So and when we look to the U.S., there's a program in place since the late 1970s, when the airline industry was deregulated, under the Essential Air Service Program and under the Department of Transportation. They currently subsidize air carriers to serve approximately 60 communities in Alaska and 115 communities in 48 states. In your opinion, should the Government of Canada subsidize air service to rural, remote, and northern regions the same way that program does in the U.S.?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Our colleagues in the U.S. say this program works well for communities. It's certainly something that we've been asking for. So the Essential Air Service Program in the U.S. is funded at $368 million now. It's increased, over 3 times since the 80s. It's a subsidy based on a revenue guarantee, based on the route, aircraft type, and they RFP that. I think any way we can work with carriers and communities to support these regions that rely on essential service and have no other forms of service or have very little is very important to our network and our fabric of our communities across this country. So I definitely think this is a program worth investigating further.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Koutrakis, and thank you, Ms. Pasher. Prochainement, nous avons M. Barcelouval. Vous la parole.
We now have Mr. Barcelouval, and you have 5 minutes. And thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for here, and I'm very excited by Mr. Lemieux being here. One of my colleagues, Sébastien Lemire, talked to me about a new service called the Nouveauté, because we know that our transporters are working very hard to serve the region. But for Proper, they developed this Edgar platform, which they spoke about during their platform. And I want to come back to it. So Edgar is a system where you have charter flights, but those charter flights are shared. So thanks to the new technology, you can share these flights with other people who are interested on taking this flight. So all the costs are divided. So there is a better service for the region. I find this extraordinary. I mean, it's revolutionary. But you did mention in your comments that unfortunately it can be open to anybody. It's only for businesses, and a change to regulation is necessary so that it can be open to all passengers. So can you tell us what kind of change is necessary? Thank you for the question. In fact, without necessarily changing the regulation on air passenger protection, what we need are exemptions under this regulation. And the reason that we are working with businesses only and their employees is because the people who are, preparing those flights, they need to conserve their benefits. And that's what I mentioned in my flights. So what we need so that we can operate to all passengers, I'm going to give you an example, very simple example, okay? So for somebody who doesn't have a job, but somebody has fragile health, so they need to go. Right now, we can't take that person out because of regulation. And where am I going with this? If we had an exemption and that people could choose the type of transport that they wanted under the condition that they want, so they could be exempted from the regulation, the APPR 4.1, for those who are looking at it. We would be very happy to give you an official document with all the regulation, and it would show exactly where we would need exemption so that we can offer those flights to the population. We'd be very happy to do that. When there's a seat that is sold to an individual, so this is not somebody who belongs to a company or anything, well, automatically we fall under this. But for a charter flight, we don't want to have to pay penalties to passenger because we had to modify an itinerary for their charter. So it's like chartering their flight. So I understand. So the exemption that you are talking about is exemption from the APPR for those charter flights. So we would have to see what is the opinion of other groups, but it's certainly something that is that needs to be explored. I find it's very interesting. So the other question I wanted to ask is, you were also saying that to establish new routes, there is a problem with the cost effectiveness and the reliability. You're saying that it would be very good if there was a subsidy program for the empty seats, at least at the beginning, a little bit like what we saw during the pandemic with the subsidy programs for all the regional transport in Quebec. But there was another program that was put in place that was similar, that was before the pandemic, and these were specifically for locations that didn't have road access. My question is this: if such a program was put in place, should it be limited to only locations that do not have road access, or just any isolated region that may have road access as well? In my opinion, definitely any remote region, even if they have road access, they need the support from the government. They need those subsidies. And I want to come back to the example that I gave you. For example, in the community where I stay, it's 6 to 8 hours by road to go to Montreal. Generally, for specialized medical appointments, you have to go to one of the large centers. And with a large transporter, if you use one of the big carriers, you have to leave for 3 days. You have to leave in the middle of one day, then you have a night at the hotel, go to your appointment, and then another night at the hotel, and then come back. So if we had a charter company that could do this link, it would be good. Last question, maybe you can answer quickly. Do you think that the user-payer model for the region is something that is functional? Should we encourage it, or should we find other ways to help? We have to find other ways. We have found a different way with our Edgar platform. If I had 1 minute, I can give you 20 seconds. I'm going to try to do it in 20 seconds. We have 25 companies in the region that have invested in the funds to charter their own flights. And those businesses, they took charge themselves to have flight Monday to Friday. They do the back and forth between big centers like Montreal every single day. So there are other ways, and you have to make the large companies participate. But in the current regulation, those companies, if they want to help their community, they want to offer empty seats to all passengers, they can't do this. They can only offer seats to their own company and employees. Mr. Barcelot-Duval, can you tell us a little more? What is the regulation that does not allow this to happen? I'm going to be careful with what I'm doing. Okay, there's always a way to do it, really. But if we are doing it right now, we are exposing the charters to the risk of having to compensate those passengers that may have decided to fly. Those charters are for moving employees. So if, for example, there is a meteorological situation, very often in the north, a decision is made to just cancel a flight. So with the APPR, if a ticket had been sold to the public, the transporter and the charter flight, they would have to compensate the passenger. They would also have to book him on a separate flight. I understand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses. I'm glad you had a chance to share your thoughts with the committee. Mr. Lemieux, I understand your company is a charter service, provides medevac services, but I'm wondering if you can describe the situation when it comes to competition in your region. I know it's a rural region, probably similar to the one I represent. Are the communities in your region served by multiple large airlines when it comes to scheduled service to larger hubs?
Actuellement, non. En fait, notre région, Rouen-Noranda, est desservie.
In fact, our region, Rouen-Noranda, for the region, there are other transporters. We have other partners. They have their own liaison. But for the city of Rwanda, there's only one Air Canada flight that does the back and forth one day. And it's in the middle of the day. That is the only transporter that we have. And with the project that we created with the organization that I just mentioned, where we can offer the route between Rouen and Montreal on Monday and Friday. There's been several trials in the past for some small carriers like us. We've been trying to, implant ourselves in small communities and regions. But what happened in 90% of the case is that the large carrier, I don't want to say who it is, but they decide to, bring their rates all the way down to the floor for competition, and then the small carrier, has to fold. So it is important to have a program that would be a joint program with the government for the launch, because launching is very difficult. If there was a program who would help us just to launch so that we can compensate all the losses that we have in the beginning, it would help us demonstrate to people the quality of the service that we can offer as regional carriers.
To what we experience in Northwest BC, and certainly consistent with what we've heard from other witnesses from rural areas, that it's difficult to compete with large airlines that are able to use their size and their market dominance to force out smaller players. Ms. Pasher, I was very interested to hear about the U.S. model, I believe it's called the Essential Air Service Program, and it almost harkens back to the time before deregulation when smaller regional routes were licensed to specific carriers by the federal government, and there were conditions based on service to those communities. Of course, it comes with a certain amount of subsidy in this case to allow those carriers to make a business case, but it also ensures that they're providing an adequate level of service for those communities. And Mr. Chair, through you, I'm just wondering if any party submitted the U.S. Department of Transportation as a potential witness to share more information about that program.
The answer is no.
I think it would really benefit this study to understand in greater detail. I understand from Mr. Benjamin, who was with us earlier this meeting, that Transport Canada is looking at the U.S. example, but it would really help us with our recommendations if we understood in greater detail how that program works. So if it's in order as an emerging motion, Mr. Chair, I will move that the committee invites a representative from the U.S. Department of Transportation to appear as a witness as part of this current study.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. Is there any disagreement to that? Perhaps we can do that with unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, so adopted. Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. You have 1 minute left if you have any other questions you'd like to ask. Otherwise, we can adjourn. It's up to you.
Well, maybe I'll ask Ms. Pasher about affordability, because often what we hear from the airports is the need for government investment in infrastructure, and I certainly understand those concerns. This committee has supported a recommendation to reinvest the rent that airports currently pay to the federal government in airport infrastructure to help make their operations more viable and more sustainable. But the question in my mind is how those investments get passed along to passengers in terms of greater affordability. And, you know, my experience in a rural region is that when a carrier has a monopoly, they seem to charge passengers pretty much the maximum that people are willing to pay for the flights. How do we ensure that when we invest in airports and we reduce the cost of operation for airlines, those savings get passed along to customers through more affordable airfares?
Well, in a user pay model, like these user fees are a flow through on the ticket. So this is, you know, if it wasn't there, then it wouldn't flow through to the ticket and then the airline wouldn't need to charge it. But I think ultimately what you're talking about is affordability of air travel broadly. And really, our view is the best way to have lower airfares for consumers is to have competition. And, you know, we've seen it with WestJet, Porter, Flair, when they have head-to-head competition, that drives down fares. So I think the good news is we have Porter on the scene and growing, nearly 80 planes expected in their fleet by 2025. So it's much welcome competition. And we as policymakers need to make sure that we have the right environment for Canada and for the aviation ecosystem in order to compete. So I think the more we reduce costs and burden on this system, then the more affordable it'll be for Canadians to fly, and the better that is for rural and remote communities as well.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pasher, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. That concludes our meeting for today. I'd like to thank our witnesses for appearing before us. This meeting is adjourned.